Welcome to tonight's sleep story. This is a classic little tale about a princess and a prince and a fairy godmother who helped make a fairy tale romance come to life. So snuggle up and close your eyes so you can fall fast asleep as you listen along to the story about Cinderella and the little glass slipper. Once there was a gentleman who married the proudest and most haughty woman that was ever seen. She had, by a former husband, 2 daughters of her own, who were, indeed, exactly like her in all things. And he had, likewise, by his first wife, a young daughter who was of unparalleled goodness and sweetness of temper, which she took from her mother, who was the loveliest creature in all the world. No sooner were the wedding ceremonies over when the stepmother began to show herself in her true colours. For she could not bear the good qualities of this pretty girl, and the less because they made her own daughters appear the more odious. And so she employed her in the meanest work of the house. The poor girl was made to empty the chamber pots, and scour the dishes and the tables, and scrub the floors on hands and knees. And she was forced to clean her stepmother's chambers, and those of her stepsisters too. She slept in the attic on a wretched straw bed, while her stepsisters slept in fine rooms with parquet floors, on beds of the very newest fashion. And the stepsisters had all the finest luxuries, and looking glasses so large that they could see themselves in their full length from head to toe. The young girl bore it all patiently and dared not tell her father, who would have scolded her, for his wife governed him entirely. When she had done her work, she was made to go to the chimney corner and sit down amongst the cinders and ashes, which caused the stepmother to call her Cinderwench. Only the younger stepsister, who was not quite so rude and uncivil as the older one, called her Cinderella. However, Cinderella, notwithstanding her coarse apparel, was 100 times more beautiful than her stepsisters, although they were always very richly dressed. One day, the king's son decided to host a glamorous party, an evening ball, and invited all of high society to attend. The 2 stepsisters were invited, and were mightily delighted and excited, and became wonderfully busy in selecting the gowns, petticoats, and hairdressing that would best become them. This was yet another difficulty for Cinderella, for it was she who ironed her stepsisters' linen and pleated their ruffles, which was a long and tedious task. The stepsisters talked all day long of nothing else but how they should be dressed. For my part, said the eldest, I will wear my red velvet suit with French trimming. And I, said the youngest, shall have my usual petticoat, but then, to make amends for that, I will put on my gold-flowered cloak and my diamond corsage, which is far from being the most ordinary one in the world. They sent for the best hairdresser they could get to design their headpieces, and adjust their hairdos. And they had their makeup brought from Mademoiselle de la Poche. They also consulted Cinderella in all these matters, for she had excellent ideas, and her advice was always very good. Indeed, she even offered her services to fix their hair, showing her good and generous heart, services which they very willingly accepted. As she was doing this, they said to her, "Cinderella, would you not like to go to the ball?" "Alas," said she, "you only jeer me. It is not for such as I am to go to such a place." "You are quite right," they replied. "It would make the people laugh to see a cinder wench at a ball." Anyone but Cinderella would have fixed their hair awry, but she was a very good person and dressed them perfectly well all the same. The girls were so excited that they hadn't been able to eat a thing for almost 2 days. Then they broke more than a dozen laces, trying to have themselves laced up tightly enough to give them a fine, slender shape. And they were continually in front of their looking glass. At last, the happy day came. They went to court, and Cinderella followed them with her eyes as long as she could. When she lost sight of them, she started to cry. Her godmother, who saw her all in tears, asked her what was the matter. "I wish I could, I wish I could," sobbed Cinderella. She was not able to speak the rest, being interrupted by her tears and weeping. This godmother of hers, who happened to be a fairy, said to her, "You wish that you could go to the ball, is it not so?" "Yes," cried Cinderella, with a great sigh. "Well," said her godmother, "be but a good girl, and I will contrive that you shall go." Then she took her into her chamber and said to her, "Run into the garden and bring me a pumpkin." Cinderella went immediately to gather the finest she could get and brought it to her godmother, not being able to imagine how this pumpkin could help her go to the ball. Her godmother scooped out all the inside of it, leaving nothing but the rind. Having done this, she struck the pumpkin with her wand, and it was instantly turned into a fine coach, gilded all over with gold. She then went to look into her mousetrap, where she found 6 mice, all alive, and ordered Cinderella to lift up a little trapdoor. She gave each mouse, as it went out, a little tap with her wand, and the mouse was that moment turned into a fine horse, which altogether made a very fine set of 6 horses of a beautiful mouse-coloured dapple grey. Being at a loss for a coachman, Cinderella said, "I will go and see if there is not a rat in the rat trap that we can turn into a coachman." "You are right," replied her godmother. "Go and look." So Cinderella brought the trap to her, and in it there were 3 huge rats. The fairy chose the one which had the largest beard, touched him with her wand, and turned him into a fat, jolly coachman who had the smartest whiskers that eyes ever beheld. After that, she said to her, "Go again into the garden, and you will find 6 lizards behind the watering pot. Bring them to me." She had no sooner done so than her godmother turned them into 6 footmen, who skipped immediately behind the coach, with their liveries all bedaubed with gold and silver, and clung as close behind each other as if they had done nothing else their whole lives. The fairy then said to Cinderella, "Well, you see here a carriage fit to go to the ball with. Are you not pleased with it?" "Oh yes," she cried, "but must I go in these nasty rags?" Her godmother then touched her with her wand, and, at the same instant, her clothes turned into cloth of gold and silver, all beset with jewels. This done, she gave her a pair of glass slippers, the prettiest in the whole world. Being thus decked out, she got up into her coach, but her godmother, above all things, commanded her not to stay past midnight, telling her at the same time that if she stayed one moment longer, the coach would be a pumpkin again, her horses mice, her coachman a rat, her footmen lizards, and that her clothes would become just as they were before. Cinderella promised her godmother she would leave the ball before midnight, and then drove away, scarcely able to contain herself for joy. The king's son, who was told that a great princess, whom nobody knew, had arrived, ran out to receive her. He gave her his hand as she alighted from the coach, and led her into the hall among all the company. There was immediately a profound silence. Everyone stopped dancing, and the violin ceased to play, so entranced was everyone with the singular beauty of the unknown newcomer. Nothing was then heard but a confused noise of, "How beautiful she is! How beautiful she is!" The king himself, old as he was, could not help watching her, and telling the queen softly that it was a long time since he had seen so beautiful and lovely a creature. All the ladies were busied in considering her clothes and headdress, hoping to have some made next day after the same pattern, provided they could find such fine materials and able hands to make them. The king's son led her to the most honorable seat, and afterwards took her out to dance with him. She danced so very gracefully that they all the more and more admired her. A fine meal was then served up, but the young prince ate not a morsel, so intently was he busied in gazing on her. She went and sat down by her stepsisters, showing them 1,000 civilities, giving them part of the oranges and citrons which the prince had presented her with, which very much surprised them, for they did not know her. They couldn't recognize her, you see. While Cinderella was thus amusing her stepsisters, she heard the clock strike 11 3/4, whereupon she immediately made a curtsy to the prince and everyone at the ball, and hurried away as fast as she could. Arriving home, she ran to seek out her godmother, and, after having thanked her, she said she could not but heartily wish she might go to the ball the next day as well, because the king's son had invited her. As she was eagerly telling her godmother everything that had happened at the ball, her two stepsisters knocked at the door, which Cinderella ran and opened. "You stayed such a long time," she cried, rubbing her eyes and stretching herself as if she had been sleeping. "If you had been at the ball," said one of her stepsisters, "you would not have been tired with it. The finest princess was there, the most beautiful that mortal eyes have ever seen. She showed us 1,000 civilities and gave us oranges and citrons. Cinderella seemed very indifferent in the matter. Indeed, she asked them the name of that princess, but they told her they did not know it, and that the king's son was very uneasy on her account, and would give all the world to know who she was. At this, Cinderella, smiling, replied, "She must, then, be very beautiful indeed. How happy you have been. Could I not see her? Ah, dear Charlotte, do lend me your yellow dress which you wear every day." "Yes, to be sure," cried Charlotte. "Lend my clothes to such a dirty cinder wench as you are. I should be such a fool." Cinderella, indeed, well expected such an answer, and was very glad of the refusal, for she would have been sadly put to it if her sister had lent her what she had asked for jestingly. The next day the two sisters were at the ball once again, and so was Cinderella, but dressed even more magnificently than before, with the help of her fairy godmother's magic. The king's son was always by her side, and never ceased his compliments and kind speeches to her. All this was so far from being tiresome to her, and indeed, she quite forgot what her godmother had told her. She thought that it was no later than 11 when she heard the clock striking 12. She jumped up and fled, as nimble as a deer. The prince followed, but could not overtake her. And dashing out the door, she left behind one of her glass slippers, which the prince picked up most carefully.